be of interest to you joining into this session. And we will do the session until 12:30. After that, it will be lunch. So with that, I welcome Peter Bach Andersen, Senior Researcher at DTU, Department of Electrical Engineering. Welcome.
Okay. I hope you can hear me. All right. Thank you very much for that introduction. We're just setting everything up when I go get the go signal.
I need to share the.
Just waiting for the presentation.
This one here. Go.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. So the name of this presentation is A Smart and Sufficient Charging Infrastructure for Electric Vehicles. Let's see if I have my clicker working. Yep, here we go. All right, first, a very brief history. So I'm from the Department of Electrical Engineering from DTU. And we have had more than 10 years of experience by now on investigating the integration of the electric vehicle into the power system. So this is a very quick view over the projects we had within this area. You could say a trend is that many of the projects we had, shown here with a green frame, has looked very much into the interactions between the electric vehicle and the power system. So when and how the electric vehicle charge, but also how the vehicle can provide some kind of benefit and optimization into the power system. But a trend also now we had it in the beginning and now we're picking up again, is that we are as much focusing on the rollout of infrastructure, because we realize that with the increase in electric vehicles and the targets we now have for electric vehicles, it is very important that we use this time to prepare the charging infrastructure. So many of the newest projects we have shown in blue emphasize both kind of the rollout of charging infrastructure, but also this grid integration aspect, which we think is important. We have been working on 3 reports within this area. We came out with, in the end of 2019, a report on the need for public charging infrastructure in Denmark to facilitate 1 million electric cars. We have done a report on another, we think, important topic on how housing associations prepare themselves for charging infrastructure. But it basically anywhere where you have like a shared common parking facility, how do you prepare that parking lot for electric vehicle charging? And then finally, we also are finalizing now a report, which we call Smart from Start, on what capabilities the individual charger need to have to make it future-proof. And this is especially when it comes to smart charging, so controlling the charging process. But this talk today, I'm mainly going to talk about actually the first and the third report and the findings we had in those. Yes, and again, we kind of central to our research is this notion that the infrastructure for charging cars both have to be sufficient, effective, in terms of numbers and geographical distribution. So we have to have enough charges, a question of quantity. But then the second is also, while we have a chance, we should proactively define what those chargers should be able to do so that they are smart. It's a question of qualities of these chargers. So these are the 2 kind of main keywords we are operating on. The first study on the sufficient charging infrastructure we did here at DTU, but together with the Danish EV Alliance, with these authors. The reason we started this study, I think, becomes very obvious in the next few years when hopefully we will have more and more electric vehicles, and that is the need to ensure that we have enough chargers for our cars. In Denmark in these days, the politicians are discussing more tangible targets for EVs in Denmark, and it could be anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million EVs that we will ultimately be aiming for 2030. But there is, in the industry, among experts, there is kind of this common understanding that we need much more chargers than we have now. And this is actually also when you ask the Danes, this is from a survey from 2018, where some of the questions are around the charging infrastructure. And you can see here that actually 41% either fully or mostly agree that it will be a challenge to charge an electric vehicle if you get one. And more than half actually say that they fully or mostly agree that there are too few public chargers in Denmark to facilitate the number of vehicles we want. So that's why we really think it's an important challenge to look at. For this study, our first question is, where will we charge? The wonderful thing about electricity and the electric grid is that we now have much more options on where to recharge our vehicles. There's many different possibilities on where we can place these charging options. I like to differentiate between destination charging and charging destinations. So destination charging is when you go somewhere and then there's charging infrastructure available at that location. So the charging is available where you go as part of your natural daily or weekly travel patterns. Opposed to that, you have charging destinations is somewhere you go with the sole purpose of recharging your car. That's kind of similar to the petrol stations where you used to go somewhere to refuel and then you go back to your regular life again. Depending okay, so for destination charging, we have this idea that there will be this natural parking time that we can use. And wherever there is natural parking time, it will also be more convenient for you to refuel your electric vehicle. Depending on this location, you will also have different charging powers available. So that is, the more time you have available, essentially the less power you need. While if you have this charging destinations like a station, you want as much power as possible so you can quickly move on to drive on. So, and this is kind of forecasts we did on how we think the charging powers will develop at these different locations over the next 10 years. Yes, and then we have this notion of charge speed. But essentially we think, for instance, for home charging, we will stabilize at least 11 kilowatts. And that'll give you essentially 1 kilometer of driving distance for every 1 minute that you charge at home, which we think is a very nice compromise between convenience and cost. All right, the next big question is how long will we be able, or how often will we have to charge? So this has a connection to how big batteries we have in the cars. So in the same way, we looked at different car sizes from small to large, and for the different years from 2020 until 2030 to try to have an idea on how big are the batteries going to be. After talking to the car OEMs, we have the understanding that there will not be like these huge leaps in battery size. There will be an increase in battery size, but then when you have enough so that the vehicle is practical to own and drive, instead the focus will be on price and driving down the price on the vehicles. But let's say, just for medium-sized cars, and if you consider like from 25 and onwards, you should have for all cars at least a driving distance of 400 kilometers. And given that an average car in Denmark drives 45.5 kilometers a day, that should actually give you quite a lot of days between you actually need to recharge your vehicle for daily or typical driving at least. And the final factor we looked at for this study was, what does it cost? This is a simplified table, but we tried to break it into many different aspects. And what does it cost when you have to put in a charger? And what kind of surprised me in this study is that the cost differences are quite significant between whether you just have a normal charger up to 22 kilowatts, or if you're going for one of these very new fast chargers. So I think we absolutely need fast chargers, but you have to be very mindful of where you put them and how many you need, because the cost for establishing them is quite significant. As you can see, up to 240,000 euros for one outlet. Finally, for the study, we used a resource, the Danish National Travel Survey, which is a huge repository of data on the Danes' travel habits. So this is an interviews-based survey, and we have roughly 10,000 interviews per year. So quite a big data source that are collected at the TU data. So from that data, we could find out some interesting things. One of the most immediate questions for us was that how much public charging infrastructure we need kind of depends on how many of us will be able to charge at home versus how many will not be able to charge at home when they own an electric car. And there we found that in Denmark in general, 68% will actually, they have parking options at their house. They have private land on which they can park, like a parking garage or a driveway near their house. And all those people should theoretically be able to charge at home. So that is for that group of people, that makes it much, much easier to own an electric vehicle. But then we also found that roughly 20% has some kind of typically shared parking facility. So a parking garage they have to share with their neighbors and so on. And those people, theoretically, they can have something like home charging if they can agree with other people on how to set it up and share the cost and all those things. So that's kind of a middle group that might have access to home.
Sound is off in the auditorium for everyone online.
Yes, it is.
something that helps kind of the infrastructure problem a little bit is that the folks with the most cars and which drive the most also likely to be in areas where there are better access to home charging. So people have fewer cars and drive less in the cities. So that kind of helps out a little bit. But in the end, based on our study, this is kind of the need for public charging infrastructure we see in Denmark. Not for long term, not for when you do long trips, but for like typically daily driving demands. And there you can typically see that the big Danish cities is where we need to establish more public charging infrastructure. You can see Copenhagen, Aarhus, and Aalborg kind of stands out. This is something I'm not going to go into. This is a slide you can look at later if you're interested. I'm just going to, the gray box in the middle shows that we found that we need an additional 25 to 30,000 public charge points in 2030 with an investment of 3 to 4 billion DKK. That will give us a ratio between public charges and EVs of, sorry, it's actually the other way, 27, one public charge point for every 27 EVs. And this is opposed to the AFI directive that says 10 to 1. So actually we find that we need less, but again, this might be a somewhat conservative study. But we do need much more charges. Then finally, this is a little bit out of the scope of this conference, so I'm going to keep it quite short. But as I mentioned earlier, we have to be early in defining the requirements for the charges. If you have fast chargers, maybe you are not so interested in this, but if you have chargers where you are able to control the charging process, where the car is parked for sufficiently long, you want this kind of intelligent infrastructure. We have investigated again for more than 10 years this idea that the electric car can be an active part of the power system. It is that it can, for instance, it can be part of a smart home, which is shown to the left, where the vehicle interact with different kind of local resources like photovoltaics to provide energy autonomy and other things. The vehicle can also be an active part of a local neighborhood. That would typically be to avoid that you overload the local distribution grid. If a lot of your neighbors come home at the same time and charge at the same time, there's been this, at least this notion that the distribution grid can be overloaded. But we can at least ensure that there's some coordination between EV charging on a local level. And then finally, the electric vehicle can also be an active player in the regional kind of power system where you want to optimize the use of renewable energy. And you can actually also use, which we have demonstrated, and I think Andreas will also talk about, we have a case where the car has been an active part in stabilizing the grid, handling some of the challenges which are introduced together with renewable energy. So this is a list of the use cases we have found for electric cars, but enough to say that there's many different things you can use the car for if you have intelligent chargers in place. In the UK, they're already making a law or a regulation that requires that when you buy a charger, it should be a smart charger. So I think it's very nice if in Denmark we do the same thing. Actually, we see like a step and progression in the charging infrastructure that first we have to convince people that they actually have to buy a charger. Some people, when they own an EV today, they just have this plug or this cable that plugs into a normal plug socket at home. There could be, in some cases, that's actually not safe. And under all circumstances, it eliminates this chance for smart charging, of communicating with the charger to control how and when the vehicle charges from the power system. Many people might buy dumb chargers, which supplies power, but which you cannot connect to and that cannot talk to the power system, let's say. But then what we hope to push for is these green chargers where you at least at level 1 are able to have what we call dynamic charge limiting. So at any time within seconds, you can tell the car to reduce how much power it draws from the power system. Just by doing so, you can actually already support a lot of the use cases that we have found for electric cars. So we can reduce charging in hours where there's a large strain or load on the power system. We could also reduce the charging in hours where there's not any renewable or only very expensive power available. I think I have to round up this. I think I'm going to skip this one, but there's many different, again, it comes back to the many different use cases we found for this. Essentially, it boiled down to three kind of overall requirements that we are trying to push. First, all chargers sold in Denmark should have communication. They should be able to communicate through the internet using a secure, open, and standardized communication interface to connect to a trusted third party. There should be this possibility of dynamic charge limiting. So any charger, we should be able to tell, please reduce your charging at this time. And finally, very important, we should have requirements to data and measurements. We should have high quality approved meters inside all the chargers. And we should also make sure that data is recorded with a high resolution and stored so we can use it for documenting the behavior of the charger. Yeah, again, I'm not going to go into detail, but this is our attempt at trying to specify these requirements in a bit more detail. Okay, on my last slide, I'm just going to plug a project that we started last month, the Fuse project, which is actually aiming at these exact two topics that I just spoke about. We are working with Frederiksberg, which you maybe remember. I mentioned them as the most densely populated municipality in Denmark. And there we're going to show that we can both introduce an infrastructure where charging is hardest, where there's least land available, where it's most expensive to put up a charger. But we claim that we will put up a strategy for providing charging for everyone who lives there and for everyone who visits the municipality. So it's an infrastructure which is efficient. And on the other hand, we're also coming back to my last point about all these equipment being future-proof. We can communicate with it, and we can prove that this infrastructure can be used to actively support our target of a stable, economic, and renewable-based power system. So we're very excited about this, and please reach out if you want to hear more about the project. And that's it.
We have some questions here.
All right. Do you want me, or
Okay.
is it sorry, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Peter. So we have a couple of questions coming in. So the top on the list is, have you considered the possibility to charge while driving?
Yeah, that's a very good point. What we do is that we differentiate between the charging technologies we think will be dominating over the medium and short term. So let's say 5 to 10 years. And then we are talking about, in the Fuse project, for instance, we are talking about disruptive technologies. So we recognize that there will be large changes in charging infrastructure that will totally change how infrastructure is rolled out. When we're talking about destination charging, when we're talking about these charging options you see here with conductive charging, we're talking about what we think will be dominating for the next 5 to 10 years. And then it's in the continuous exercise to understand when we have to transition to some other technology. It could also be super fast hybrid charging, where you go where you can charge almost as fast as you can with gasoline fueling today. So we are mindful of these technologies. Yeah, that was a short answer.
Okay, thank you for that. The next one in the list is, have you calculated CO2 effect of increased batteries sizes and the actual cost money-wise? What kind of grid and power effect do you require?
All right, so I see several questions in that, but yeah, very good. The first about increased batteries, no, we didn't look into that. But I can understand from other research, of course, that the time it takes for an electric car to recoup the extra CO2 that was generated while it was made, it'll be increased if you have a larger battery. So you should live with the smallest possible battery you can practically have, so you have the greenest possible vehicle. And I think a nice thing we can find out is, with investigating kind of the real driving patterns and the real charging demand of people, we can find out how big batteries do you really need. I think if you have, if you don't drive that often, and if you have a really good charging infrastructure available, maybe you will actually be able to live with a smaller battery in your car, and that will make the CO2 calculation much more beneficial. Yeah, and the question about what kind of grid and power effect do you acquire? Okay, if I understand it correct, again, we have to size it depending on your actual demand. So again, we have to find out for any given location where you want to put up a charger, who is going to use it and how much time are they going to spend there? Because you don't need to provide any more power than is necessary. Because as I showed with the cost of charging infrastructure, it's much more expensive if you want very powerful chargers to be located. So you have to be very mindful of the actual demand when you put off the infrastructure. Yeah, I hope that kind of answered it. Otherwise, reach out.
Okay. Then we have a final question then. How do you see the charging infrastructure develop over the short and long term with heavy-duty freight transport?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Unfortunately, I haven't really looked into that, so I don't think I can answer. I can only say it's something we also probably will look more into in the future, because that's also a very important topic. And we are also kind of interested to understand how much technology will be shared between private cars and heavy transport in general. If that kind of transport needs their own kind of charging infrastructure altogether, or how much overlap there will be. But no, it's not something we looked into, or I looked into at least. Not really.
Okay. Then we thank Peter Bach with an applaud in the auditorium and silent one virtually. And we welcome up Andreas Tingvall, who's going to talk about state of health evaluation of 10 vehicle-to-grid EVs. And while we're doing that, I would also like to tell Peter Bach that you can write me on Zoom in the chat and answer to the question that we left unanswered, and I will give an answer to that in writing.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you online.
So we should just change the presentation.
Yeah.